Chapter 14. I did not even know where the pueblo of Zoquiapan was located, but by the second day after I had returned home, I was determined to go the following day and see what arrangements could be made there for Trina when she arrived. I learned, mostly from a local map, that Zoquiapan was about 8 kilometers from the nearest road, which I judged to be about an hour-and-a-half trip each way. The next morning, I secured the aid of an American boy who had grown up in Oaxaca and spent his days roaming the high Sierras near the city. He spoke English at home and Spanish everywhere else, so I mistakenly thought he could translate for me as well as guide me to this village. I knew he was mentally backward, but he had a fine spirit, and, like all humanity, he just wanted to know that he was loved and needed. At 11 the following morning we started off. Since the sun was high and warm and I expected to be back in Oaxaca by 6 that evening, at the latest, I did not even take a sweater. That 8 kilometers turned out to be the direction the crow flies, and unfortunately I was not equipped like a crow. In the first place, the road from the highway to the jumping off place was little more than a donkey trail. So I gave up and parked the car, reasoning that I would still be back there before dark. Make a long story short, we walked, and then we walked some more. I was overweight, and after the first 8 kilometers I cursed my indulgence and vowed that I would, in the future, carry no more weight into those mountains than I absolutely needed. About 6 p.m. we finally arrived at our destination, over 3 mountains and approximately 20 kilometers. One of my toenails had worked into my foot, my sock was filled with blood, and my crying muscles made every step unbearable. Reason attempted to take over from my heart, and I felt that it would be unthinkable to subject Trina to the terrible ordeal of coming in and going out of Zoquiapan. Now that I was there, however, I determined to give them the message, leave and forget this village. The people were very, very suspicious. When they asked what I wanted, I replied that I had come with a new message from God. The people would walk away. My guide, I discovered, knew only one language, English, and Spanish were all the same to him. When I spoke in English, he answered in English, and when someone else spoke in Spanish, he answered in Spanish, never realizing the difference. So I stood all alone, save God, unfamiliar with the language, in an apparently hostile situation. I sat in a corner and, in complete reliance, contentment with the will of God, repeated to myself the remover of difficulties. As I prayed, a drama unfolded that I would not believe had it not happened to me. A native entered, looked as though he came straight out of a Western movie. He had on a big hat, 6-gun, boots and all. On his belt buckle, in gold, was the word Policia, and even with my limited Spanish I understood that. He asked what I wanted, and I again explained that I had come with a new message from God. He rattled on, a mile a minute. I understood nothing of what he said, and my guide was useless as a translator. However, I caught one word, identification. I took out my Mexican Baha'i credentials. I did not believe he could read, as he only glanced at them, then satisfied, handed them back. He then turned to the boy. I found out later that this game they play is an extortion racket, and he was after money. As the policeman talked to the boy, I could see the consternation and fear on the poor lad's face. Finally, he bolted out the door, with the cop right behind. When I saw the policeman drag out that formidable hog leg of a 6-gun, I caught his hand and explained in the best way I could that the boy was loco en la cabeza, which was all I could do with my Spanish. That's crazy in the head. The policeman shook me loose. In the meantime, the lad had fallen into a water ditch and was soaking wet. But he had long legs, and the cop had short ones. The policeman began to shoot, but there were no bullets in the gun, thank God. I started down the mountain, but my foot and sore muscles prevented me from making much speed, and realizing I could be of no assistance, I committed the lad to the care of God, and so left the crazy cop chasing the crazy boy over the mountains. When I returned to the municipal building, the entire atmosphere had changed. The whole village had watched this affair with great merriment, and being a warm and generous people by nature, they felt a compassion for this poor gringo. Never in my life, up to this time, had I seen such a rapid change. Quite a number of people now gathered around, and in my halting Spanish I gave them the healing medicine of the love of Baha'u'llah. How eagerly they received it! Their enthusiasm was overwhelming. Thank God my heart reasserted itself, and when they asked questions, I promised that in 4 days I would return with a señorita who would answer all of their questions. By now it was totally dark, and 5 or 6 people accompanied me up a hill to get some tortillas to eat. As we were returning to the municipal building, a young man stepped out in the road and said, "This is your home." The men accompanying me argued that sleeping arrangements had already been made elsewhere. However, this beautiful young man ignored them, and looking directly at me, he said once again, "Esta es sua casa." God doeth whatsoever he willeth. I thanked my other benefactors for their help, and followed the young man into his house. Sitting completely at ease within, unharmed and safe, was the American lad who had accompanied me into the mountains. I first sat with my host, then with his sisters, and then gave them the message. Then the father entered. Although very humble, he mirrored forth a quality and dignity not often encountered. He sat down and very gently said, "Tell me." After I had done the best I could, I promised them all I would be back that weekend with a translator. There could be no doubt of their sincerity, warmth, and love. Finally, my host gave me his own bed, which consisted of a very short plank without bedding. The night got colder and colder and colder, yet my host's sister slept outside on a narrow bench, also without bedding. My muscles began to stiffen, and at about 2 a.m. I decided that if I remained another 3.5 hours on that bed, I would turn to ice and would have to be pried off. I got up, went over and opened the door, and gazed at the biggest, most beautiful moon I had ever seen, which turned the night into almost day. Every star shone with brilliance, reserved only for those mountainous retreats. The boy and I hiked out toward the car by moonlight, and kept warm by struggling up and down mountains. By the weekend my foot had swollen, and I had a very severe infection, but did not he say, "Make an effort for us, and in our ways we will guide you"? I could not stand on my foot, and had soaked it in various remedies, even carved at it with my knife, all to no avail. Of course, I had made my return to the village provisional, and I always do, inshallah, God willing. I could still see every face in the village, and many had said, "Oh, will you really come back? If you will come to teach us about God, I will stay home from work. I will wait for you." No, my heart would not let me disappoint those sincere hearts. How happy I was with this decision. Now I truly felt the day had come when God was about to let me sacrifice something in his pathway. This time I drove the car to the very end of the road, which saved us 7 kilometers, but cost me $100 in damage to my vehicle. As Trina and I struggled up the first mountain, every step was pure agony. Finally, stout-hearted little Trina stood in the trail with a tear running down each cheek and said, "I can't, I can't, I can't." We sat down and said some prayers, then got up and struggled on. Upon reaching the summit of the mountain, truly one of the greatest miracles of my life took place. Trina again stopped, but this time With a face radiant and beaming with light, she exclaimed, "Oh, oh, oh, what a heavenly place! I have never felt such a spiritual place. I feel as if God is with us, really with us." My own reaction was that now Baha'u'llah was walking with us, and once more I was denied the privilege of giving something to the cause of God. Who is there among us who would not crawl on our hands and knees to have the bounty of walking with the glory of God? With tears filled with joy, we went forth, singing the praises of God and sending Allahu Abhas cascading over the mountains ahead of us. I felt no more pain, and though still on this physical earth, I had ascended into the heaven of heavens. I must have floated all the way to Zokiapan, for I cannot recall walking. We had 6 declarations in Zokiapan that day, all in the family of my hosts from the previous visit. Our first Baha'i, the daughter of the family, walked hand in hand with Trina quite some distance down the trail when we left. With exhausted bodies but joyous hearts, we made the long trek back to my car. As we ascended an extremely difficult mountain along the trail, there appeared a small adobe house. My body cried out for a little rest, and I reasoned that surely this must be a Baha'i home where those warriors of Baha'u'llah of today and in the future could rest as they come and go to Zokiapan. I said to Trina, "Surely this is a Baha'i home," and courageous little soldier that she was, Trina marched to the door with a cheery "Buenas tardes." The man who came out was a spiritually dead man. Only his innate courtesy suffered our intrusion. But as we were tired and Trina was enthusiastic, we sat and gave the message. This little man sat with lifeless eyes and closed ears. We learned that he had lost his wife. All purpose in his life had drained away, and even his body was wasting away. He looked to be 80 years old. How my heart yearned over this poor, unfortunate one. At every pause or question, he would respond with "Si," yes. And although I knew he had heard and understood nothing, I did not interfere. I concluded that I had made a mistake in stopping at this home. Finally, as he had agreed with all Trina had said, she asked him if he would not like to be a Baha'i also. Of course, as before, he said yes. When Trina asked him for his name, he showed the first sign of life, and one could see the realization dawn on him that he had committed himself to something he knew nothing about. Only the words, "All are his servants and all abide by his bidding," can explain why I held my peace and did not interfere. This will remain one of the mysteries of my life, for I feel it is important to make absolutely certain that one understands completely the reality of the coming of the glory of God, Baha'u'llah. When a soul has accepted and truly believes in this reality, then surely he can be numbered as a true Baha'i, for the following of what his pen has revealed will in most cases come as naturally as new plants follow the spring rain. The man explained that he could not read or write, but Trina told him that God wanted only his heart, and she would sign his card for him. So very reluctantly, he gave Trina his name. My heart was so filled with tender love and compassion for this empty little man that I got up and lovingly took him into my arms. I told him how much he was loved and needed, and now, with all of us, he could help build a new and beautiful world in the cause of God. Then Trina warmly took his hand and welcomed him in the same spirit of love and tenderness into the faith. For the first time since we had met him, he truly came alive, and we witnessed the rebirth of a wonderful child of God. All these evidences of love and warmth, he responded, "Wait a minute, just a minute. I really want to be a Baha'i, but that name I give you is not my name. I want my real name on that piece of paper." On our next visit, this little man, with his eyes shining, ran to embrace us on the trail. When I said, "Do you still really want to be a Baha'i?" he answered us with, "Oh yes, and already I am telling my neighbors about God's new messenger." On the second trip, we presented him with a small greatest name, designed by some dedicated artist friends. He took it and lovingly kissed it and assured us he would place it in his home in the most honored spot with his Saint Guadalupe. His daughter-in-law, he explained, although she was supposed to read the prayers to him, read them herself instead, so he had to take his prayer book back. Then we met his daughter-in-law, Pasquala, in her ragged clothes, as she worked laboriously grinding her corn. I tasted from her the reality of sincerity in the love of God. She never just mentioned the word God. Every time she said it, she uttered it with such a love, respect, reverence, and sincerity that I was thrilled from the soles of my feet to the top of my head. As tears rushed to my eyes, I cried out in my soul, "O my God, I come as the teacher when truly I am the student, and who truly are the poor, not this angel before me who lacks even the barest necessities of life, but we of the world. I would most gladly give up everything else if I could but attain to that sincerity and purity of spirit she inherently possessed." She explained how much she believed in Baha'u'llah and how she loved the prayers, yet she was afraid to sign her card because her husband would beat her. I told her not to worry. The card was only a symbol, and only her belief and heart were important. I gave her a prayer book of her own. I wish that you, dear reader, could have experienced but a drop of this soul's love of God, for I am sure it would have been a revelation to you as it was to me. On our next visit, Pasquala explained that although she feared her husband, she feared God more, and that she insisted upon signing the card. Then she set about gathering her ragged clothing, advising us that now she was going to run away from home with us, as she did not want her husband to beat her. Now, weren't we in a fine predicament? We lovingly told her about the importance of unity, and especially family unity, that the purpose of the cause of God is to unite people, not divide. So she stayed for God. We learned later that her husband not only did not beat her, but is now also a firm believer in Baha'u'llah. In the spring, it was necessary for me to go north on business, and when I returned to Oaxaca, our little man's face had filled out. His step had a bounce, and he now looked as if he were only 30. With what love did he receive us? And amazement upon amazement. As we entered his house, lo and behold, Guadalupe was gone, and all alone was the beautiful greatest name on his wall. At that time we had 34 Baha'is in the pueblo of Zoquiapan, and each one is a story like those related above. We have had, as Abdu'l-Baha promised, people come out the door to declare themselves. In the state of Oaxaca, we had 125 declarations in about 12 months of active teaching.